when you have time, which is your greatest asset. So when you look at your balance sheet and you see all your things, your business, your bank accounts, all your investments, whatever it is, those aren't actually your greatest assets. Your time is. And with that time brings that space I was sharing with you in your mind. That is called clarity. And when you have clarity, you make better decisions, decisions that are made from love, not fear. And when you're making your decisions from love and they're better, you will be more successful.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Moeller, and on this podcast, we will be interviewing guests that have made their mark in real estate, in business, and in other areas of life. Listening to podcasts myself has helped me in so many different ways and continues to do so. If you're a real estate investor or an entrepreneur, or aspiring to be either, or just someone that wants to learn, you've come to the right place. An easy way to have an impact is to share this episode with friends or family, provide a review, or just spread the word. We greatly appreciate it, and now let's get to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Moeller Real Estate and Business Podcast. I am really excited for today's guest, Rob Dube. Rob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Phil. Thank you for having me. What an honor to be with you today.
Rob, I really appreciate it. And for our listeners, if you don't know who Rob is, so first, recently, when was the book launched, Rob?
That would be March of 2024.
So not long ago, but the book Shine, which honestly is just, it's really for entrepreneurs, business leaders, business owners, driven people, but it gets into some really deep topics and really important topics, in my opinion, some things that I've experienced. And I read it front to back. I got it earmarked from front to back. So just a great book. He co-authored it with Gino Wickman. So for our listeners, you've heard me talk about EOS and traction, level 10 meetings, things like that in the past and implementing it. So Rob co-authored this book with Gino, kind of put their minds together to create really a great product. So, and Rob, you're an entrepreneur as well with a background in this stuff. So it's not like you just, came up with this, but there's a reason that you wrote the book and you wanted to be a part of the book. So that's maybe where I want to start, is how did we get here? Why do you do what you do? Why did you come to write the book?
Well, like most things, I think in life, for many of us, all of us really, we go down paths, who knows where they'll take us. So for me, I started selling blow pop lollipops when I was in high school with my best friend. I didn't know that was going to bring me on a journey of entrepreneurship, but the two of us started a company out of college, which we still own today, but we don't run. And it was a copier company and still is. So we were up and down the street just selling copiers. Tough business, but we were just happy to have a business. Along the way, we met a guy named Gino Wickman, who you mentioned at the outset. He was just getting a new business going for himself, which later became very well known as EOS. So he started consulting us on how we were running our company. And really a key point in time for the two of us, because it really helped us gain control of our business. We were all over the place, and it had been a good 8-9 years since we had started it. Shoot forward 3-4 years later, we were hitting on all cylinders. We were approached by a public company and ultimately sold the company to them. And who knows, who would know? And it was just dumb luck. 18 months later, they had a big executive shakeup, and the new CEO contacted us and said, "Would you like to have the company back?" So all of a sudden we had the company back. And when we got it back, we thought, how could we do this differently? Is there anything we would want to change? And we were inspired by a book called Small Giants. And the premise around that is business owners and leaders that care for the totality of their team members' lives. So we took that really seriously and started to, really take our culture to new heightened levels. And we're recognized pretty widely for doing so. Couple more key points here, and then we can move on to some questions.
Yeah.
I realized at a certain point I had hit a ceiling, and we weren't going to hit our 10-year target if I was running the company. So my business partner and I decided to kind of put it out there and look for somebody who could we could put a succession plan in place with and take over the company. And once you know it, we had a most wonderful person show up in our lives, and he came into the company. We did a succession plan over a few years, and now he's running the business, and really much more on target than we would have been
Wow.
for our 10-year target.
You,
So around that time, Gino and I got back together, and we had this idea around these 10 disciplines for managing and maximizing your energy that he had created, and some other ideas that we wrote about in the book, Shine, and ended up creating a program and writing the book as a result. And so that's what got me here. And why do I do this? I don't really ask myself that question very often or at all, really, because I try not to put too much thought into ego related things like what's my purpose or I was meant to do this. And that's just for me, that's just how I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with that for other people, but I just do what's called to me in the moment and try to do the best I can to make an impact and see where I show up next.
so I love, first of all, yeah, so the book, and I'll just read the subtitles, but Shine, 10 Disciplines for Maximizing Your Energy, Impact, and Inner Peace. And then also how looking inward is the key to unlocking true entrepreneurial freedom. And the
Yes.
main kind of first section of it, and I'm curious how you applied this, but talks about just decision making. You even talked about purpose and like, I'm curious why, but the whole the first section of the book is about, are we making decisions out of love or out of fear? And
Yeah.
I know since I read the book, I've been thinking about like just this is what I want to do or this is what I think, but then I'm putting it through that frame of reference. Am I making this decision out of love or fear? And then at most times I'm like, oh shoot, this is out of fear. So you're
That is
completely changing our
awesome.
whole strategy, but honestly, it's a really good framework. So tell me more about what that means, kind of the framework you have in the book at a high level. Don't give it too much away because we need our listeners to buy the book. But tell us about the framework and kind of how you and Gino arrived at that.
Yeah. So, as entrepreneurs and driven people just in general, a lot of times we end up going down paths where we end up putting ourselves in prison. And we might reflect back on some of the decisions that we made along the way that put us in prison and ask ourselves, why did I make that decision? Now, I'm a big believer that whatever decision you made was the right decision in the moment, because sometimes you need to inflict pain upon yourself to learn lessons so you can move forward in a more healthy way next time. And
Hmm.
sometimes we need lots of those. But our goal and what you shared with your own experience is exactly what we would hope for anybody reading the book, is that you said it in a great way. You said, I put it through the filter, you
Yeah.
know, and it's so great to hear that, because that's exactly what we hope people will begin to do. They might just pause in that moment where they have a decision to make and just ask themselves, is this coming from fear or is this coming from love? Is this coming from ego or is this coming from my heart? And with driven people, entrepreneurs, people building businesses, a lot of times it's coming from ego. They might feel like, if you want to go really deep, they're trying to prove to someone else that doesn't actually even care that they can be enough, that they can be successful. So sometimes there's like these underlying things that are going on. Sometimes there's things like FOMO. I always like to use the example of a company that's just killing it in their market. And then they notice that one of their competitors moves into a different market, and they paying attention to what's going on in the industry. They look over and they say, oh, did you see our biggest competitors moving into a different product line or a different market? Maybe
Yep.
we should be doing that. And the next thing you know, you move resources around, you create a little havoc, and that you're in another market. Your profit margins start going down, and you might start asking yourself, why did we do that?
Yeah.
because it was shiny and you did it from fear. You
Right.
did it from ego. You were afraid. And so if you do it from your heart, you might make a different type of decision.
How
So
do we, so I can relate, I'm sure others can relate to the kind of, I wrote down fear, ego, FOMO. Like, there's no doubt that people, myself including, are making decisions through that lens, and that's probably the default lens, right? So I think people understand that. What
right.
I think, like, how do we make those decisions out of love or from the heart? Or what's an example of what we might do differently where, okay, this is a decision I'm making out of love and from my heart? Because I think
Yeah.
people know this one because it's default. How do we be disciplined and do it the right way?
So the first thing I would like to ask you is because that's really interesting for me to hear that you feel that people realize they're making fear-based decisions on a regular basis. So my
Um,
first question, if no, go ahead, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
don't know that that's good. I control. Remember this. I control the mic here. No, I'm just kidding. Um, I think when people hear it, they'll recognize, oh, I am making decisions out of fear. So I'm not
Good,
saying a lot
good.
of people recognize that, but I think when they hear this conversation, they're going to be thinking about decisions, saying, yes, I'm making these decisions out of fear. How do I flip it? What do I do?
Right. Yeah, yeah. That makes complete sense because I always, whenever I do a talk and people hear this, I see their heads shaking like bobbleheads up and down, like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I get you. So you're
Yes.
spot on, Phil. People do get it right away. So, similar to what you do, you start to pause and you start to run it through the filter. Again, is this coming from fear or is it coming from my heart? And or ego or my heart, or meaning love. And so, examples in business, similar to what I shared before, but where you can kind of slow things down, is to keep going a little bit deeper with yourself. A great example that in things that I notice that entrepreneurs and driven people do is they have big dreams. And I want you to dream big, but I also want you to dream big in a way that is aligned with the kind of life that you want. I'll give you an example. When I was younger and I was building my company, my kids were playing tennis. And so I would go to their tennis matches. So I would race out of my office, you know, get to the match right on time, but I wouldn't get out of my car. At the time, I would bring my laptop and I would sit there and be doing work and being on calls while they were playing their tennis match. And I reflected on that years ago, wondering, what was going on there. Like I was physically there, but I was so not there.
Yeah.
So, so
Been there, by the way.
yeah, okay, great. Thank you. I'm glad you can relate. So what was happening was I was so driven to build my company that nothing else really mattered. So I was trying to be what I believed to be responsible by physically being at their match. And I suppose, I don't want to be too hard on myself, and I don't want the listeners to be hard on themselves either, in that at least you're there. I mean, not being there could be worse, I suppose,
Yep.
but we want to be fully present in each and every moment and embrace what it is that we are doing and what we're there for. So in this example, coming from love, I don't, I don't overextend myself building my company because I know my priorities are truly being present with my family. In my case, my wife and my two children at the time. And so,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just that's a good segue to, like, you taught, so the first section, kind of love or fear, we've talked about that. And the second really section of the book is what you're getting into, which is being driven but also having peace and figuring that out. And I think, for me, as you talked about that, like balancing family with, if we think we're being driven, like if we think we're driven around our work and what we do, and we think that that is out of love. And I agree that we need to keep asking ourselves deeper questions to check ourselves on that, because there's probably more there. I think we can evolve and get deeper and deeper within that. but we're driven, right? So we want to be great dads. We want to be great moms. We want to be great husbands and wives. We want to be great business leaders, executives, whatever it might be. But we want to have like the idea of being at peace sounds really exciting, but it's hard to do. So how the heck do we do that?
Yeah, isn't that funny that now we're at a point in our lives where peace sounds nice and we're trying to figure out how to do it. Like
Yeah.
everyone just like think about that for a second,
Yeah.
you know? So these are the kinds of lives that we've created. We've
Yes.
decided that we are going to go down a path that is not peaceful and then pursue peace. Once we realize how unpeaceful it is, we go down the path. But hey,
Yeah.
you know, that's what happens, you know,
Right.
and it's just a matter of circumstances. We've somehow we became this way, and everyone has a different story around why it is that happened. But just know that at the core, and I think you and most about everybody listening will agree that peace is inherent within us, you know, so it's there. It's like we don't have to search for it. It's right with us at each and every moment. Now, part of the book that you mentioned is called the 10 disciplines. So that's one way of creating impact and peace in your life. Continuing to be able to feed that drive that you have, but being able to do that with that peace that's inherent with you each and every moment. And the way that you do this is you build a strong foundation in your life and you're very clear about what these boundaries are. Now, we created the 10 disciplines, and some people don't like numbers or lists or even the word discipline. But in this case, it's important because having these in place, this foundation, creates the framework now for you to experience the peace. And I'll give you a few examples. First, I'm going
Yeah.
to start with the foundation. Let's just say you were building a home and you're going to invest a lot of money into that home. And you have a meeting with your builder at the property and they just poured the foundation and the builder's walking you around and showing you the foundation. And the builder says to you, it's looking good. 80% of it is solid. Just 20% of it's kind of cracking, but don't worry about it. We're going to get building. Of
Yeah.
course, you'd stop that person in their tracks and say, don't do another thing until the foundation is solid.
Yeah.
So you need a solid foundation from which to build on. And the 10 disciplines, when you look at them, they seem very simple, but one of the things that happens that we've noticed is people will get really good at like 6 of them. And so what they're missing out on the other 4, which is the example of the foundation of the home that I shared. There's
Yeah. Yeah.
cracks.
Yep.
Okay. So when you have that strong foundation, you begin to get more time in your life and space in your mind. Okay. And when you have time, which is your greatest asset. So when you look at your balance sheet and you see all your things, your business, your
Yeah.
bank accounts, all your investments, whatever it is, those aren't actually your greatest assets. Your time is. And with that time brings that space I was sharing with you in your mind. That is called clarity. And when you have clarity, you make better decisions, decisions that are made from love, not fear. And when you're making your decisions from love and they're better, you will be more successful
Yep.
in your whole life. But
Yeah.
if you just need this to motivate you to be more successful in your business to start with, go for
Right.
it.
What so you've developed this, you and Gino, over the last few years, whatever that time frame is, but like what's an example of a significant change you noticed in your life when you did this? So you, after adopting the 10 disciplines and just when you applied all 10, I think, in your life, what is a big change you saw?
So early on, I'll give you one example. Discipline number 6 is called say no often.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you begin to have some success, what happens? A lot of opportunities start coming your way. And if you're a visionary and you are driven, they
Mm-hmm.
all sound good.
Mm-hmm.
And we are such special human beings that we believe we can actually accomplish them all. So we start saying yes to many things, which means we aren't clear about the few things that will make the biggest impact in our business and bring us the real success that we believe we're looking for. So,
What's funny about this one is that I think I needed to prove to myself that saying yes was the wrong thing to too many things before I learned to actually start to say no. And I'm still working on it because, like, I mean, seriously, I've heard, you got to say no before, but until I feel the pain of saying yes to things that aren't kind of in our core, aligned with our true core focus, or even before we had clarity of our core focus and 10-year vision, without that clarity, which is number one, like 10-year thinking, but without that, once you get that, it makes it way easier to say yes, like knowing what to say yes and what to say no to.
that's
But
right.
I also, to me, it seems like I had to go through the pain of saying yes to really learn that I need
Yeah.
to say no. So if you haven't done that, just listen to us, but you might not, and you might have to go through the pain, I guess. Is
Yeah.
that what you've experienced or?
Yeah, for sure. It's like I was mentioning before. Sometimes we go down a path because we need to learn the lesson and we end up in jail. And then we need to break out of jail. And so we learned our lesson. So yeah, that's very good. One thing I just want to build on was say no. And I like to share an example of a client of ours.
Yeah.
And this doesn't have to do with business, actually. This has to do with their personal life.
Great.
So for many years, this person had a monthly get together with his college buddies. And they would get together and drink a bunch of beers. And this was going on year after year, month after month. And it was just a routine. And he went through the program and he was reflecting on his life. And he was starting to feel that this get together with his college buddies wasn't in alignment anymore because he had a higher awareness
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
And he stopped going. He let his buddies know, I really, I need to spend more time with my family, and this isn't working for me anymore. And it was hard
Yeah.
because you don't want to disappoint your buddies and stick with this great, ritual you've had for all these years. But he said no. And
Yeah.
it was so freeing for him, he shared. So there's an example of a personal life situation because saying no just isn't about business stuff. It's about non-work stuff too.
And in the book, it triggered it when you talked about it, but there's a section where it helps you, it gives you some questions to ask yourself
Right.
what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to. And
Yeah.
like for example, if you're saying yes because you have FOMO, I don't know if that's a question in the book, but just to give some examples from the book, there's a list of questions where it will make you rethink why am I, and it goes back to just like all the 10 disciplines go back to making decisions out of love or fear, and then also the fact that you can be both driven and have inner peace. So I like
Right.
that. A couple of different things I want to jump to first. So the first discipline is 10-year thinking, right? And
Yep.
it's I love this one, but I do struggle with so I talked about EOS and like traction and 10-year vision for a bit from a business perspective. I think it's really important. 10-year thinking isn't just business, by the way, right? Let's be thinking about in 10 years from now, what are the age of my kids going to do and what do I wish I've done over those 10 years? There's this, what does my health look like? What can I be doing now? So long-term thinking I think is important. But what I think I struggle with is like, how do we put goals and metrics around 10-year thinking out of love, not out of fear, right? So, like, I'm almost trying on our business plan, like, what are numbers metrics for 10 years? And I almost hesitate to put numbers around them because I'm like, what is driving the number? And the number doesn't excite me as much anymore. So like, how do we apply this to the long-term 10-year thinking to goal setting while avoiding doing that for, out of love and not out of fear, I guess.
Yeah. So the first thing is 10-year thinking is not goal setting. So you don't have to. You can if you want. I don't know about you. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what my business and my industries are going to look like 10 years from now. I mean, I've been in business for over 30 years. And when I look back, there's always been changes in the 10-year periods that I would
Right.
have never imagined happened. So, we teach to take the pressure off of any sort of goal setting there, but start to imagine what your life might look like. You use some great examples of what's my age. I think you said, what are my kids' age? It can be as simple as one sentence. I want to have a loving and truly connected relationship with my spouse. It can be that simple because what you can do with that is you bring it back to the present moment. And I call these kitchen moments, when you're in the kitchen with your spouse and they're not loading the dishwasher the way you think they should load it, you might pause before you criticize them and think, what a special thing it is that we're here together in this space and that we can load the dishwasher differently and the dishes still get clean.
Yeah.
Or that we even
Amazing.
have a dishwasher.
Right.
That's pretty cool too. Because how you show up in this moment, this present moment, will impact your 10-year thinking vision for your
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
So that's one simple example of a way
Yeah.
that you can use it.
Yeah. No, and I like that. And I think just framing it up in the long term to guide our immediate actions. And then, I think around the goal setting topic, I think is a great, like, 10-year thinking is not goal setting. Do you encourage people to have goal? Like, I mean, what's the philosophy on goal setting in general, even shorter term?
Yeah, I think goal setting's great, and if that drives a person and keeps them with their eye on the ball and, gets them super focused each and every day, moving towards whatever it is that they believe is the most important thing that needs to be done for their businesses or for themselves in their personal lives, do goals all day long. I'm all for
Awesome.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
So I want to shift a little bit to um, just ask a question about, like, you talked about, we build ourselves into a prison, and I've talked to different business leaders and entrepreneurs um, about this, and they feel like, I mean, I don't know, I maybe they're not using that strong of a word to me, but they're burnout maybe is the way
Yeah,
that I hear people say, like, I'm just burnt out.
sure.
I don't have the energy for it. Um, so when you were successful, but maybe weren't peaceful, if I can use that word, like,
Yeah.
what were you telling yourself at the time, and how did you change your mindset? Like, were you being true to yourself, or were you maybe lying to yourself?
That's such a great question. So, first, there were many things going on in my mind, too many things. And in my deepest, darkest places inside of me, so that could probably be a whole nother podcast. But I believe that that has a lot to do with, you know, what is driving us without being our true selves is there's other things at play that are going on. you know I think about money as one example for myself. I was always worried I wouldn't have enough, I wouldn't provide enough for my family. And when I started to do work around money, I started to understand where that fear was coming from. So fear was driving me. I mean, you know, I think everyone will agree with money, there's a point of diminishing returns,
Hmm.
where you have enough and where more doesn't really matter. Maybe there's added comforts you can put into your life, but we all know that those don't actually make us happy at the end of the day. Yet
Right,
many of us still drive ourselves so hard when we're already past that point of having enough comforts.
right, right.
So what's going on there? So that was part of it.
Yeah.
I'll give another example. When I started my business, I remember my mom said to me, how long do you think you're going to do this for before you get a job with some benefits and a retirement plan? And then like 5 years later, or each year for 5 years, she kept saying that to me every year. She would keep bringing it up. It was like she couldn't believe, it just her belief set was that this is risky, which she was right. Business is risky, and go do something safe. And so what did I want to do at 25 years old? I need to prove my mom wrong.
Yeah.
She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just trying to protect me.
Yep.
I looked at it as a personal challenge, and wait till I show her. That's not a reason to build a company.
Yeah.
And, that's coming from fear.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's just two examples.
no, and I appreciate you kind of talking so openly, actually leading me to the question. I want to add just like the money topic. It's almost
Yeah.
like you have to go through the money phases to get to a point where where you realize, okay, yeah, this isn't going to change my life anymore. Like, but I think if you're in the earlier phase, maybe financially in your career, there's a lot of fear there, and then all of a sudden maybe it shifts to like fear of just, survival, but then
Yeah.
it shifts to fear like FOMO. I'm not going to have this or have that or whatever. But it seems like again, we can talk about this all day long, but people almost have to go through this process themselves, just like the prior discussion we had. So,
Yeah.
do you agree with that, or can people really figure this out, like really truly live and do what they're passionate about before they've kind of made it financially?
Well, two things come to my mind. First is on the money side of things, if you live within your means, you could do whatever you want to do, and you could totally live within your means. But what ends up happening, especially is driven people, people are building companies, there's other things at play there. They're trying to, have more stuff essentially. A lot
Yeah,
of times that's what's driving it.
yeah,
And if they're living outside of their means or pushing the limits, that's where the stress gets created, and they're creating their own prison. And sometimes they need to go through, and what ends up happening oftentimes is very common. Entrepreneurs driven people, end up in sometimes
yeah,
major financial situations, bankruptcy. And then you hear the great stories of how they got out of it.
yeah,
They were in debt, they got out of it, and now they're, very, very well off.
yeah.
So, okay, you can do that too. That if that's what you need as a motivator, you don't have to.
Right,
It sounds really
right.
painful,
Yeah,
but you don't have to put yourself through that. So that was the money side to it.
yeah.
What was the question? Because there was
No, so
another.
no, that's good. And I think the other thing I had referenced, you talk pretty openly about this, whether it's other stories, your own story, and you talk about in the book just your like the importance of owning and sharing your inner story with your
Yeah.
peers and team members. What is how does this make you an impactful leader? But even before like being an impactful leader, like what's the psychology of sharing? Because I think this is a societal issue where it's surface level conversations and there's not depth to conversations. And even
Yeah.
some of the conversations we have on the podcast or I have, people just it's weird, it's abnormal to have more in-depth conversations.
I
So
know. That's
so
so good. I love that question. You're so right, Phil. I feel like you and I would have a fun time in a coffee shop. And this is kind of like that, I hope.
yes, this is great.
Um, I have a lot of questions for you, but this is your podcast. So, but, I think that as a leader, in my personal experience around this, is when I began opening up about my life to my team, they saw me as a more real person with real problems, just like them. And that's because I am just like them. We're all the same. It just so happens, I have a job and they had a job, and our jobs just happen to be different, but it didn't make one person better than the other. Sadly, oftentimes when we get into building a company and we're driven people, one of the things that we're trying to do is control. We believe that we're in a position of control.
Hmm.
We want it to be our way. And we come from a place of, in business terminology, you might call it command and control. This is where we're telling people what to do, or where we're the ones with all the answers. And all of us at this point, for the most part, must know that that is not the best way to build a company.
Yeah. But it's
But
true. We so often we want to the the worldly thing to do, if you will, is like we want to show our team and others like we have control. It's under control. We have control. And the
yeah,
reality is that we're all humans and there are certain things maybe under control, but we're humans. Like we're not
right.
completely under control at all times. And we're all, yeah. So we're very much like we're the same. We're all humans. We're the same as our team members.
100%. One of a personal story I'll share with my other company, imageOne. So I had met this person by the name of Jack Stack, who wrote a book called The Great Game of
Oh
Business.
yeah. Great book. Of
Yeah.
course.
So I was fortunate to meet him, and he asked The Great Game of Business. One of the main premise
Reminisce.
is open book management,
Hmm.
open book leadership.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Oh, are you practicing open book finance?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I don't know that everyone would understand our numbers. I don't know if they'd understand an income statement. I don't know, if things are bad, they might get nervous. If things are good, they might think we're making too much money and they're not getting enough of it." He just laughed at me. And he said, "Yeah, okay, I've heard that all a million times."
Yeah.
But, fast forward, convinced me that this was actually a very positive thing. And so, there's an example of being vulnerable for many entrepreneurs, driven people, opening up the books. So we uh, opened our books. We were practicing the great game of business. And once you know it, like a couple years later, we had a big downturn in our industry, in our business. It was a major hit. It was kind of scary. And but everyone knew the numbers.
Yeah.
Everyone understood how the business ran. I mean, they knew line items.
Yeah.
So when we went to the team and said, "Whoa, like we all see what's going on here. What do we have to do?" The whole team jumped in. They
Yeah.
knew exactly what to do.
They know what drove the business and the results. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
And so making that decision from love, sharing the abundance of the knowledge, actually makes your leadership position easier.
Yeah.
Because guess what? I would have lost sleep for months at a time, but they were doing everything.
Yeah.
They were coming together as a team, rallying and figuring out, how we could get through this challenging time. And they did. And
Yeah.
we were stronger on the other side of it.
Yeah.
So the weight of the world does not need to be on your shoulders.
Yeah. I mean, I was, in my past, I was in the corporate world where it wasn't, we didn't talk specifically about open book management,
Yeah,
but that was the philosophy, like just share the numbers and make the team, because if the team understands the numbers and the key drivers of the business, they can react to it. And they probably prevented the slowdown, like before you started before it
for
started
sure.
slowing down, they had an impact before because they could start to see the numbers changing too. So
You got it.
by the way, there's a local company that uses this. I've talked to their COO quite a bit, and they are like they live and die by this. The whole organization knows this. They have a great structure around it. So that's a
It's a great
great book
process to build
reference.
on top of
Get
EOS. It
get the
really
book
is.
get the book Shine first, but yeah, and actually I like that because you can integrate all the EOS tools are supportive of the open book management philosophy. And
Totally.
your bigger, that was an example, but your bigger point is if you're open with your team, to kind of go back to even the prior discussion, if you're open with your team, if you're transparent, if you're authentic, there's a lot of fear around that, right? And that's not just your team, that's others, that's your friends, that's your kids. There can be a lot of fear around that. And
Right.
that's so therefore that's a fear-based decision. And
Right.
those are the types of things where if you just out of abundance, out of love, and just trust that that things will work out, they will work out, right? And
Right.
maybe here and there could be a hiccup or two because people aren't used to it. Net, it's always going to work out in the long run. Having that
Yeah.
philosophy and mindset will.
A couple of things, first of all, the people with the hiccups, you start to realize you have them in your organization because of fear. And you start to get really clear, like, well, this is the kind of organization we are. We're open and honest. And that doesn't mean everybody that comes into the company has to share their inner story.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. And they certainly can if that's the kind of culture you want, but that might not be super realistic. But you start to understand, like, who are the people here at this company that fit within our culture. You have your
Yeah.
core values,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is an important part to it. And the other thing is, as leaders, we all too often are walking around with a suit of armor on. And, people can't see the true us, yet they want to so badly. So what ends up happening? For some reason, I always go back to the kitchens. What ends up happening is I used to always think when the team members or employees go home and they're having dinner with their family, what do you do at dinner? You talk about your day. What are they saying about their day at my company? And
Yeah.
what are they saying about me as a leader? If I have my suit of armor on, they're probably frustrated. They're probably disconnected. They're probably wondering if they're in the right place, whether they realize that consciously or subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if my armor's off and they know the true me, we've built great trust together. And my hope was always that people would talk at the kitchen table with their family and say, wow, I'm so lucky. I'm just so lucky to be with this company. I mean, we're just selling widgets. It's nothing special.
Yeah. Yeah.
In our case, we were just selling copiers. It's just another company that sells copiers,
Yeah.
but it's a fun place to be. I'm learning a lot and I feel safe.
Yeah. I want to, so first of all, a couple thoughts there. One, being open and honest and even core values. So now we're pulling in some traction, EOS level 10. The level 10 meetings in the segue at the beginning of the meetings where you're talking about a personal win and professional win from the last week starts to basically open up this armor or break the armor where it allows it just invites an open conversation amongst the team, in addition to a great way to kick off a meeting. So that's one thought. But the other thing is, do we apply the same philosophy with our families, with our kids? So being
Yes.
open and honest and like
Oh,
transparent and vulnerable.
please. Yeah. I mean, imagine that. Parents who are always letting you know what's happening. And so kids, one of the things that is so great about kids and that we lose as adults is kids pick up on energy. Like they're much more in tune. It starts to get desensitized as they get older, but younger kids, especially, they really pick up on energy. So the words don't matter to them. They're not meaningful. What matters to them is your energy. And when your energy is off, they feel it. And that has an imprint in your kids,
Yeah.
and so that's an important thing to recognize as if you have kids and you have a family. And
Yeah.
so they know when there's secrets.
Yeah. The
They
other
may
thing
not.
else,
Yeah, go ahead.
what I was going to add is with employees and kids, if you want them to be open and honest with you, you better be open and honest with them. So from a kid's
Exactly.
perspective, as they're growing up and they run into challenges, adversity, and just bad days, you want them to be open and honest because who do they go to? Do you want them to go to a friend or do you want them to come to mom and dad and be open and
Right.
honest and just know that it's a very safe place to go? So, and the same thing with employees. If employees are thinking about doing something different, changing careers, going to they're thinking about that anyway. So why
Right.
not be open and honest or said differently, you want them to be open and honest with you. So there's a lot of different layers to this one that I really like. So I appreciate you being open and
I
honest
love it.
about the topic, quite frankly.
For sure.
Um, I want to shift to a couple closing questions here. First of all, like, what I'm going to talk just mindset briefly. Like, what really created or changed or grew your mind? Like, whatever was, if there's a big shift or kind of a phase of your life, whatever it might be, like, what really drove where your mindset is today? How did that change?
For me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll call on discipline number 4, which is be still. And we encourage people to sit in silence for 30 minutes every day. And so a little over 20 years ago, I started doing that. Now I have a twice daily meditation practice, and I'm very serious about it, but that's not for everybody. So some people who are very religious or faith-based, we recommend prayer, journaling, contemplation, or two others, or some combination of them. And I'm sure there's others beyond the four that we always recommend, but those are usually that people are more aware of and comfortable with. So, being still has been useful for me. And what my meditation practice has done specifically, since you're asking about me, is it's helped me see the patterns that are going on each and every day in my life. So when I sit in the morning and I sit, especially in the evening after a busy day, I start to see clearly what all is coming up for me.
Yep.
There's a funny saying from this woman named Anne Lamott, the author. She says, "My mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try to never go there
Oh.
alone." And the reason, that we can all laugh about that is because our bodies know that when we sit down without our devices in silence, it's all going to come rushing up, and it's
Yeah.
super uncomfortable. It's painful.
Yeah.
And so we don't do it. We avoid it at all costs. And when we are still, we're usually trying to zone out, like watching TV shows. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
Yeah.
that's something that people commonly do to sort of
Yep.
unwind.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, seeing that play out, seeing what's playing out in my mind, and then coming back to reality. And what reality is for me is the present moment. And so when I'm sitting, I sit on a cushion. So when I'm sitting on my cushion, where I am is right there on my cushion at this moment. I'm not actually having a conversation with my business partner about our long-term goals.
Yeah.
or having a replay of what happened during the L10 and
Yeah.
why I wish I would have said X, Y, and Z instead
You
of
act
A.
like those things have happened to you before, Rob.
Oh no, never. And they never do anymore. No, but the beauty of that, and what's been so powerful for me and many others, by the way, is that you begin to see things clearly.
Yeah.
And then when you are going about your everyday life, when you're not sitting on a cushion or a chair or whatever, you have practiced what it's like to be in the present moment.
Yeah.
And there's something very special about actually being in the present moment. And you also begin to manage the moment between stimulus and response, which Viktor Frankl is very
Yeah.
familiar with. And you have a book above your right shoulder called Man's Search for Meaning. I can't read it clearly, but I feel like that's the right, is it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, of
Yes.
course.
The only, the
We know
only,
it.
yeah, controlling the gap between stimulus.
That's
Yeah.
right.
But
That's right.
yeah.
And so that's a practice. We have to practice that, each and every one of us, because our lives are just very busy.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
and I
our
think
minds are,
I the nature of a driven person, the book talks about being driven, and I love be still. There's first of all, I heard a quote this morning. It was around one of the different ways to be still, which is prayer. And like if you don't, and you can apply this to prayer or to meditation. If you don't have 30 minutes to pray, you need an hour, right? Or if you don't have 30 minutes to be still, you need an
yes,
hour. And if you're driven, you're like, I don't have an hour. Basically, it's I don't have an hour or 30 minutes to waste is how we're thinking about it, right? But the productivity impact of being still and the clarity you get as to what you're going to do and be focused and the productivity, if you will, impact or just the impact in general of being present then at work or being present then because you're adopting that practice at home with your kids, with your spouse. There's a positive compounding impact of that. So we just so often think I don't have the time and it's not productive activity, myself included, and it's completely the opposite of that actually. There's so many
well
things in this
said.
world that are just counterintuitive to what we think automatically is like, no, it's not true. It's actually different than what we think.
You are so right. And what's driving us is our never ending to-do list and set of goals that we're chasing after.
Yeah.
And so when we sit down, it's uncomfortable because we think I need to be doing X, Y, and Z, or, oh my God, I forgot to do this. I forgot to call that person. And that's all normal. And the beauty of just being there and sitting with it and letting it go by like clouds in the sky, or whatever you're journaling or whatever praying, whatever your method is, there's, as you say, there's a settling of the sand in the jar of water, and the
Yeah.
clarity begins to
Oh man,
arise.
I love that. I highlighted that analogy in the book, by the way. I
Oh,
love that
cool.
one. I have four more things to ask, but I can't, we don't have the time for it. But I just want, Rob, you guys, you're doing some awesome work. I mean, this is really important stuff, because there are people, I mean, I've had conversations, I've had periods of my life. There's people that are going through challenging situations, challenging things, chaos, putting themselves in prison, as you say. Like this is deep, meaningful work, in my opinion. So if you just step back and really reflect and think about what you're doing, how does it make you feel?
I love that. Um, again, I try not to come from places of ego. So I feel really honored and humbled all the time, when I'm working with people around this content, especially when I see them embracing it and making really positive changes in their life that are helping them live a life that's more in alignment and has that inner peace that we, are hopeful that everyone will bring forward. Again, that inner peace that is already right there with you. And we're just trying to help you bring it out to the forefront. So, yeah.
I love that, Rob. Thank you, man. This is, again, I highlighted something, but this has been so good. I'll first say, again, the book Shine by Rob Dube and Gino Wickman. Go get your copy. It is a great read. But Rob, how can people find out more about you?
You can go to the 10disciplines.com and you can spell out 10, or you can put the number 10. And it'll have all the information, that you'll be looking for. We have a great assessment there. So let me plug that. It's called the
Yeah.
True Self Assessment. It's 20 questions, and it'll help you better understand exactly where you are on your journey.
Awesome. That's amazing. I have to check out the assessment myself. Again, the book is great. I mentioned it, but I have earmarks all over and
That's
underlines
so
and
cool.
scratches and everything else. So a great book, really, really powerful. Rob, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you for the thoughtfulness in your preparation in our conversation. I really appreciate you.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Rob. For the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast, signing off. Thank you for listening to the Muller Real Estate and Business Podcast. We hope you found today's episode helpful. If you know current or aspiring investors or entrepreneurs or anyone that would benefit from today's episode, we appreciate you sharing it with them, or better yet, providing us a 5-star review. To learn more about Muller Real Estate, visit our website at www.mullerre.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter or local events via our website. In closing, I encourage you to be purposeful in all areas of life, educate yourself, network with others that have been successful, take action, and lead. Thank you.